Hey, Walking Dead fans, this is going to be a review for the comic issue 193, and this is a big spoiler alert. If you are planning on reading 193 and haven't yet, you might want to stop and wait and come back to this video because it is a review. I'm going to show frames, I'm going to talk about the story and go into it. So, spoiler alert if you don't want to know, at least at this point, what happened in issue 193. But if you're okay with spoilers and don't plan on reading the issue, then go ahead. This is a review. This is the final issue of the Walking Dead comic. Okay, let me just go ahead and start by saying wow. Wow and wow. Just the whirlwind of the whole ending. Not just that this is the last comic, but the last couple of issues which brought forth the death of Rick Grimes. So issue 191, toward the end, we see Rick get shot. Issue 192, we see that he dies. And the rest of issue 192 is pretty much Carl dealing with the person that shot him. Carl is taking Rick's body back to Alexandria to be buried by Andrea. Okay, now we get to issue 193. The final issue of the Walking Dead comic is a huge time jump. I don't think it says exactly how long it is. They referenced 6 years ago, 10 years ago, but the time jump has to be probably around 20, possibly a 20-year time jump or so, because Carl has aged and looks almost like Rick, so he's aged probably near the age his father could be. He has a daughter now that's 6 years old. The daughter is named Andrea after Andrea Grimes, the Andrea in the comic that Rick got with in the comic. You know, in the show he got with Michonne. In the comic, he got with Andrea. So Carl names his daughter Andrea. And who did Carl marry? Sophia. So there was this, I guess you could call it a love triangle, but, you know, he was with Lydia. Yep, that Lydia. The Lydia that we're seeing in the TV show right now. Alpha's daughter. She's still alive, and in the comic, Carl gave the sheriff hat, Rick's hat, to Lydia. And in the comic, even 20 years or so, flash forward, time jump into the future, Lydia still has that hat, and we'll see that as we get to that frame. So the comic opens up with Carl killing a walker that is on his farm. So the cover, we see farmhouse, we see the arm of what looks like a walker, and it ends up, that is what it is. The opening frames, pretty much, that's Carl's farmhouse. He's married to Sophia. He has a 6-year-old daughter, Andrea, and a walker comes onto the property, and what does he have to kill it with? Michonne's katana. So Sophia comes out of the house, says, oh my God, and we realize that walkers aren't a big threat anymore through the dialogue, that they haven't seen one in a long time. There's a safe zone, and there's checkpoints and fences, different things like that, and there's just never one around anymore. But what's pretty funny, what ends up is that they're wondering, where did it come from and how did it get into the safe zone? And he realizes Herschel must be in town. And Herschel, of course, is Glenn and Maggie's son. Glenn, of course, died by Negan in the comic, just like he did in the show. So Herschel never knew Glenn, and Maggie has went on to actually become president, head of the whole Commonwealth area, the eastern side pretty much, because they talk about connecting to the western side. So I don't know if she's president of the country or just the eastern side. I don't know if it even mentioned exactly, but I think she's just president of the Commonwealth, what became even bigger after Rick died and all of that. But Herschel has become, we're still in wagon days. It's still like old Western time. They're building railroads and putting trains in and stuff. So it hasn't gotten back to the gasoline times yet. So just like back in those days, there's traveling salesmen and traveling showmen. And Herschel is a traveling showman showing off walkers. You can see his card. It says, "See the Walking Dead. Don't get too close." So this time jump into the future, people have forgotten kind of what it was like before. They don't ever go out into what's still the real world and see the ugliness or the walkers anymore. The traveling show is something that people pay money to see. Of course, Herschel knew that one of his walkers got out of the cage of the wagon, and Carl's pretty pissed off. He says he killed it. Herschel's pissed off because he says that's personal property, and it ends up that they go to court over it. So at court, it ends up that Maggie steps in and says, there won't be a fine. Carl won't be fined for the personal property, destruction of personal property, which was a walker. So times have definitely changed, and you'll just have to read the comic to get the whole story. But Carl gets off without a fine, but he does have to go out and catch another walker to replace the property that he destroyed and give another walker back to Herschel. Instead of doing that, Carl pretty much sneaks in at night and kills the rest of the walkers that are in Herschel's wagon because he just don't want them around. Carl comes from those old days, right? And he knows walkers are a problem. It's just like, and it's funny, but it's just like Herschel's barn. That little wagon thing was definitely a little play on, if not a hint or nod, to Herschel's barn. Carl, though, he works kind of as a messenger. He goes around to the different communities delivering supplies and different things. And it's on his supply trip that, he's going out of town the next morning after he kills the walker. So there's a little time in between that he gets to go out and do his messenger job. And then he comes back. He actually gets arrested. But we'll get to that in a second. But who helps him on his messenger job? It's Lydia. So we get to see Lydia, and she still has the hat on. So how cool is that? So one thing that we do see in the comic, and I loved it. I actually loved this final comic. I love the story. I love the way Robert wrote it, the future, showing the future, all the little glimpses of the different people and everything. I liked it. Such a fitting end to a great comic. I mean, hats off. So speaking of hats again, Rick's hat, Sheriff's hat, a lot of times reading through the comic the first time, I would think to myself something, and by the next few frames, it would happen. So Robert, it was almost like he knows what the fans were thinking or something. But when I turned the page and saw Lydia and saw she still had the hat, I thought to myself, because they was really building up the Rick Grimes thing, the legend. It was because of Rick Grimes that they are where they are today. Communities and civilization was restored. So Rick Grimes is like a folk hero, just a huge hero, right? And they've mentioned it all the way up through the pages. So I was thinking, man, that hat's probably worth something. If people were paying to see walkers and stuff, man, I bet Rick's sheriff's hat could be worth something. And sure enough, pretty much turned the page, and Carl saying, I can't believe you still wear that. And Lydia says, damn thing must be worth a fortune. But while they're out and about, one really cool thing, they get on a train and they're riding out west. And as I mentioned before, the eastern side is connecting to the western side, and they're building a railroad track to connect to the railroad track coming from the west, and they're going to meet. And it'll be the first time since the zombie apocalypse that the east and west are connected again. So it's a big, big thing. And this shot's pretty cool. It's got Lydia and Carl coming up on where they're building the rest of the track, heading from the east out to the west. And who's in charge of this project? Eugene. So early on in the frames, we saw Carl with Michonne's katana. So I was thinking, man, maybe Michonne didn't make it. But we do see Michonne later on at the actual trial after Carl gets arrested. Well, it's not a trial, it's an informal hearing. And so we see Michonne. She's become a judge. The Honorable Judge Hawthorne. And it was Michonne. So that was really cool to see her back and in such a place of power. And she pretty much said that the keeping of walkers or roamers is a bad idea, so she's going to outlaw it. And so that really pissed off Herschel. Carl was set free, but Herschel confronts Carl in a hallway and says some pretty spot on stuff, kind of that his dad's not remembered. Nobody knows Glenn. There's no statues of Glenn and stuff being built. And that he never knew his father like Carl did know Rick. And he said that keeping the walkers, keeping people scared, was a good thing, reminding them of the old days, not taking it away so they never see it or they never know about it. Really put it in their face, and show them. Keep them reminded of the fear of what was. And he went on to say that the fear he felt around them was his connection to his dad. The fear that the walkers made him feel was something maybe that his dad felt, and that was a connection to him. So that was kind of sad and cool and true. But then as Sophia and Carl is leaving the courthouse and they come out, there's a big statue of Rick, and there's some kids playing on the base of it, and there's some kids that are making fun of him about his patch, saying, "Where's your parrot?" and all that kind of stuff. And there's one kid that's trying to defend him, saying, "That's Carl Grimes," and they're like, "Whatever." So it's pretty funny that he showed, just kids being kids, just being honorary. And that's pretty much going to always be true in society. I think it was Socrates that wrote something in the sense of, those darn kids, they never listened to their parents or their teachers. And that was, way back in Socrates' day. So it's just a thing kids do, right? Be like that. So it was cool to see that little aspect in the pages. But then it's revealed, Rick's statue with his stub up in the air. And that's pretty much maybe the cover of 191, or it was in the pages of 191 during his speech at the Commonwealth, which was really awesome. The point where he said that we're not the Walking Dead, where, way back in early issues, he had said, we are the Walking Dead. The survivors are actually the real Walking Dead. And during that Commonwealth speech, he said that we are not the Walking Dead. And I think that's where a lot of things changed. But at the very end, we have Carl and his daughter getting ready for bed. It's bedtime, and a bedtime story, him sitting in a rocker. And it's cool, the story that's told. One day, a long time ago, dead people decided they didn't want to be dead anymore. Nobody knows why. And don't be embarrassed, it scared everyone. Nobody knew what was happening or why, but life changed. Everyone was tested. That's why this time came to be called the trials. You probably heard your parents talk about it. It was a scary time, and many good, strong people lost themselves along the way. That's a cool little story. It goes on. There's 2 or 3 other more pages, at least, of the story. It's pretty cool. But the whole aspect of them sitting down, reading the story. But what this does tell us, if you go back up, it says nobody knows why. The dead decided they didn't want to be dead anymore, but nobody knows why. Nobody knew what was happening or why. So we don't get a reason, we just get the end result here in this comic, the ending of The Walking Dead. But one thing that I left out that I want to go back to, while Carl and Lydia was out traveling with supplies and stuff on their run, Carl stops by a house to leave some supplies, and Lydia says, "Why do you keep doing this?" And he's probably dead, or he's not there. And Carl says, "Well, somebody keeps taking the stuff, and I like to think maybe he's still around." So they're talking about Negan, because it shows a house, it shows a grave right by a tree there, Lucille, right? Well, let's jump ahead to the frames, the next page of Carl reading the story. Who's at the top frame, knelt down, putting flowers at Lucille's grave? Negan. So we get a frame of Negan still being alive. And even though in the letter hack section, or the letter at the end of the comic that Robert wrote, at the very end he wrote, "P.S. Negan lives," but he pretty much showed us that in the comic itself. So I'm wondering if the "P.S. Negan lives" may be a hint toward maybe a little spin-off comic just following Negan or something like that. But definitely a fitting ending, I thought. A good way to end the comic. It was okay. Rick's death, and then leading on into the final issue. I'm okay with it. I really, really enjoyed issue 193. I've probably enjoyed issue 193 more than almost any other issue since the beginning, way back in the beginning, when the story was fresh, and all of that, and early in the early days. 193 was 193 was possibly one of the better endings to any comic or graphic novel, anyway, that I remember reading. But then there's the letter at the end, and I won't go into that, but he pretty much states why and says a bunch of the stuff and kind of thanks everyone from the TV show to the comic side, everywhere. And he pretty much says he regrets it, and he knows he does, and he doesn't know what's going to happen past this point. So there's all of that to contend with us fans, dealing with, okay, what's Robert thinking now? But he does say there's 4 shows that's in the works, that's he's working on, which means the Walking Dead universe at AMC. So there's the main show, that's 1. Fear the Walking Dead, that's 2. We've heard about another spinoff coming 2020 with 2 female protagonists, that's 3. Does he mean the Rick movies? Is that 4th? Or is there actually a 4th show that they've not announced yet that he's working on? Questions. But for the comic to end with Carl and his 6-year-old daughter in his hands reading a story about the legendary Rick Grimes and the trials, as they called them, the days the dead walked the earth, that's a fitting ending, and that's pretty cool. Even with the time jump, he didn't have to fill in that 20 years. He kind of did as he told the story of this comic. You kind of put the pieces together. I liked it. I liked it a lot, and I think you'll like it if you try it out. So not only are there big announcements coming from AMC and Scott Gimple about the Rick movies, about the new spinoff show, there's going to be some big announcements and news coming with this channel as well. So stay tuned for all of that upcoming. 2019 is going to be an exciting year, and we're not even half over yet. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more dead stuff.